In a self-centered world where everyone is so concerned about protecting their own inner peace, we often fall prey to the victim mindset, which blinds us from taking accountability. And I'm not just saying this as a blanket statement or as a cliche, it's something I've observed among people my age. And I'm not here to speak from a pedestal or say that I've got what it takes to be accountable, because I've not. It's something that is still in the works for me. I think accountability is a lifelong journey. It's not something you can master overnight. And I hate to break it to you, but there's no concrete answer on how to become more accountable, because it's a process. But once you understand why you might be lacking accountability, it will be much easier for you to cultivate accountability and be more intentional in what you do. And I'm going to dive into some of the common reasons to why we lack accountability. There are a plethora of reasons, and I'm not going to be able to cover every single one of them. So I categorize them into two categories. First category of people are those who lack self-awareness. I believe that self-awareness is the beginning of your accountability journey. No self-awareness equals to no accountability, which I think logically makes sense. How are you going to be accountable if you aren't even able to pinpoint and flag out certain areas in your life that require change? So whatever that might be to you, whether it be an addiction, a bad habit, or an unhealthy thought pattern, look within yourself, identify that area in your life that might not be so productive and might be doing you more harm than good. Identify it. The reason why a lot of people fail to even arrive at this step is because either A, they just aren't used to this idea of looking within themselves, which I completely understand. In a world where we are so consumed with our work, with our classes, we don't spend enough time with ourselves doing some sort of journaling, some sort of self-reflection, right? And so I think that is something that can be quite easily solved. The other group of people who often fail to practice self-awareness are people who are egotistical or prideful. Ego and pride blinds us from looking within ourselves, from identifying our own faults, our own shortcomings, our own weaknesses. I'm not saying that having self-esteem is a bad thing, because that is a whole nother story for a separate video. I believe that this generation more than ever also lacks self-esteem, but that's not my point of this video. I'm saying that there are also other extremes where we are too prideful, too egotistical, and we let our ego blind us from identifying our shortcomings and our own weaknesses, and that can be a major problem if you want to cultivate accountability. Because how are you going to be able to identify areas in your life that might require change if you aren't even able to put your ego aside and look within yourself? And so the next category I want to dive into are people who are unwilling to change or aren't willing to follow through change. I'll argue and say that accountability is more than just self-awareness. Self-awareness, don't get me wrong, is already 1/4 of the battle won, but there is more to accountability than just self-awareness. A lot of people have this misconception. They think that self-awareness is equivalent to accountability, when it's not. Self-awareness is just the ability to look within yourselves and identify shortcomings, but accountability is identifying plus working on improving yourself as a whole. So there are people who have already done some self-reflection, but then they stop there. They think that that's the end of their accountability journey. The next step you need to take in order to further improve yourself is to find some sort of conviction to why you might want to change. And this can be done quite easily too. It doesn't require a lot of effort, but you must find some sort of conviction that you can hold to. Because if that conviction is not strong, you, number one, aren't going to change, and number two, in the long run, you're not going to be able to achieve what you originally thought of achieving. So that brings me on to the next subset of people in this category, and these are people who aren't able to follow through with change. And well, I can truly empathize with people who struggle with following through, because I myself have certain areas in my life where I know I need to change, but at the same time, conviction alone is not enough to get me through that change. We often sugarcoat our situation. We tell ourselves that our certain addiction, our certain bad habit that we might have isn't affecting anyone around us, let alone ourselves. Hence, I don't need to do anything about it. Hence, I can continue indulging in whatever sin, should I say, we are dealing with. Because I think too often times our mind tells us that the sacrifices and grit needed to change a certain habit or behavior is more costly than living comfortably in whatever bad habits we are currently living with. But I think that is a completely wrong mindset. That is something we should try getting rid of. And this is something my good friend once told me, and it's something that really resonated with me till today. And it's something along the lines of this: the fact that you have acknowledged that this particular aspect of your life might be a hindrance to you, you are subconsciously aware that staying in that pit of dirt isn't going to benefit you, right? And so by not changing, you are as foolish or even more foolish than people who are not aware of their own fault. Hopefully that makes sense. I could have worded that better, but that is the crux of what I just mentioned. And so now I come to probably the most important part of this whole video, and it's still pertaining to the group of people I just spoken about, the people who aren't able to follow through and see change, because I feel like this can be really practical advice to those struggling to see breakthrough. There are two causes to this. Number one, you are not seeing any results or any metrics of success, so hence you have no motivation to keep going, to keep on cultivating accountability. So let me give you an example. Maybe you struggle with some sort of addiction, let's just say an alcoholic addiction, and you've gone for rehab and all that, but then eventually you end up relapsing. So at that point, you think that there's no point in going back to rehab since you've fallen into that trap again. You essentially lost hope because you went back to square one, and that is something I'm sure a lot of us can relate to, right? Whenever we don't see progress, whenever we don't see breakthrough, we don't continue on with what we've been doing all along. I think that is something us human beings are just programmed to do, right? And it can be beneficial too. When something isn't working, you try to think of new solutions that might solve your problem. But in this case, I think you need to hold on to the fact that change will eventually come, just maybe not at the moment. I think something that can really help you if you are struggling in seeing results is getting an accountability partner. That accountability partner can essentially push you towards doing better and can act as some sort of motivation for you to keep on going. So other than this subgroup of people who aren't able to see results, the other group of people who struggle to follow through are those who maybe just lack consistency as a whole. I think this is especially applicable to those of you who are struggling with temptation, because temptations are very emotionally driven. They are largely dictated by how you feel. The times when you're more vulnerable are generally the times you crave and feed into temptation. And so I think the lack of consistency, the lack of discipline often lies in distractions. Simple example again, if you, let's say, are an alcoholic addict, right, and you know you are going to be tempted by alcohol, the smart thing to do would be to stay away from clubs, to not place yourself in a vulnerable situation whereby you are likely to fall into that temptation again. To those of you who lack consistency or discipline, the best way to go about things is to remove yourself from things which might be making you fall back into said temptation. And again, I think an accountability partner will also be quite useful in this case, because he or she can remind you whenever you might be feeling tempted. I think in most situations, having someone by your side to walk you through your accountability journey can definitely be helpful. So once again, my purpose of making this video is to kind of empower you, to kind of enlighten you about what I believe accountability actually is, because from what I've observed, this is a true struggle that a lot of us Gen Zs are facing. Again, there's no one way to thwart our lack of accountability head on, but understanding what you may be struggling with and why you might be struggling with that is already a headway to becoming more accountable.